In the frozen wilderness of Montana, a dying nun was saved by a giant cowboy who believed God had sent her to bear his sons. What began as a shocking prophecy soon turned into a fight for survival, a test of faith, and a choice between sacred vows and the raw power of love. Stay with this story, and you'll discover how courage, sacrifice, and the hand of God shaped a destiny no one could have imagined. So if you'd like to hear more heartfelt Wild West tales like this one, make sure to subscribe so I can share them with you every day. And if you're ready to ride into this story with me, give this video a like and drop the number 1 in the comments so I'll know you're in the saddle, ready for the journey. And so our story begins on a snow-swept road in Montana, where Sister Agnes's journey of faith meets a storm that will change her life forever. Sister Agnes had never known true cold until that Montana winter. The world had turned white, then gray, then white again, as if the heavens were intent on blotting out the land and everything living upon it. She and her small band of missionaries had set out with hearts full of faith. Believing their purpose, building a school for native children, was holy enough to protect them from harm. But faith did not mend broken wagon wheels. Faith did not fill empty stomachs, and faith did not warm frozen hands when the storm came down from the northern peaks. One by one, her companions fell away. Some wandered into the storm, seeking help never to return. Others lay beneath the snow, their bodies claimed by the relentless cold. By the third night alone, Agnes's lips were cracked with thirst, her body trembling with weakness, her mind heavy with despair. She stumbled into a drift, dropped to her knees, and clasped her hands together. "Lord," she whispered, her voice breaking against the wind, "if there be any purpose left in me, if you have not forgotten me, send your hand to deliver me." Her eyes closed. The snow buried her shoulders. Breath became shallow. She had resigned herself to God's mercy, whether it came as rescue or as death. It was not an angel that found her, but a man of flesh and bone, a giant of a man whose shadow blotted out the pale moonlight. Josiah Cutter was checking his cattle that morning, boots crunching through the hard crust of snow, when he saw the faint shape in the drift. He thought at first it was a deer brought low by the storm, but as he neared, he saw the black of her habit torn against the white. He dropped to one knee, brushed the snow from her face, and lifted her as though she were no heavier than a child. The woman was nearly gone, her pulse thin and fluttering, yet her lips moved faintly with a prayer. Josiah's heart, though weathered and stern, felt something stir deep within. For months he had prayed, no, demanded that God send him an answer to his loneliness, to the ache of living on a ranch, built by his own 2 hands, but echoing with emptiness. He had prayed for a wife, for children, for a legacy. And now, out of the storm, here lay a woman in the cloth of God. He carried her back to his homestead, where the fire roared high and blankets were piled thick. He worked with the patience of a shepherd, tending a lamb, spooning broth between her lips, warming her hands in his listening for each fragile breath. When Agnes awoke, she found herself in a cabin large and sturdy, its beams cut from the forest, its hearth alive with flame. And beside her sat the largest man she had ever seen. Broad-shouldered, bearded eyes, steady as stone. "You're safe now," Josiah said, his voice low, like the rumble of distant thunder. "The storm won't take you. Not here." Agnes, weak and bewildered, thanked him with what strength she could muster. She spoke of her mission, of the children she was meant to serve, of the town she still hoped to reach when the roads cleared. Josiah listened, his rough hands folded over his knees, his eyes never leaving her face. At last he leaned forward, his words measured, deliberate. "Sister," he said, "you prayed and I prayed, and the Lord answered both our prayers in the same breath. He did not send you here to build a school. He sent you here to build a family. You will give me sons. If that shocked you as much as it shocked Sister Agnes, hit the like button and tell me in the comments what you would do in her place." The words struck her harder than the storm itself. Her breath caught in her throat. She searched his face for cruelty, for madness, but found only certainty, unyielding, immovable, as the mountains that surrounded them. And though the fire burned bright in that cabin, Sister Agnes felt a chill that had nothing to do with the snow. Some prisons are not built of iron or stone. Sometimes they are built of snow, of silence, and of walls meant to keep you warm. Sister Agnes sat near the fire, the crackling of pine logs filling the silence Josiah Cutter left behind when he stepped outside. His words still echoed through her mind, sharper than the wind that had nearly killed her. "You will give me sons." How could a man speak so boldly with such calm certainty, as though God himself had whispered it into his ear, and yet here she was, alive because of him, breathing because he had carried her out of the storm and tended to her wounds with a gentleness she had never expected from a man of his size. He had not harmed her, had not pressed closer than propriety allowed. Still, his presence filled every corner of the cabin. She felt it even in his absence. The storm outside raged on. Snowdrifts rose against the windows, and the wind sang through the cracks like a mournful hymn. There would be no leaving, not for weeks, perhaps months. The nearest town was days away by horse, and the mountain passes were sealed by ice. Agnes understood the truth. Whether she wished it or not, Josiah's ranch was her sanctuary and her prison. Would you stay or risk it all to leave comment one, to stay two, to go? She rose when Josiah returned, his boots heavy with snow. He paused at the sight of her, bowed in prayer. His great frame filled the doorway, the frost clinging to his beard. For a long moment he said nothing. Then quietly he spoke. "Your God keeps you strong. That I respect. But he also keeps from the chair her legs unsteady and pulled her shawl tighter." Instinct carried her to her knees. The habit was torn, her veil stained from the snow, but her prayers rose clear. She prayed for deliverance, for strength, for guidance, and in the rhythm of her whispered psalms, she found a fragment of peace. "You blind. One day you'll see he sent you here for a reason greater than any vow you made behind monastery walls." Agnes stiffened but did not answer. To quarrel with him was useless. His certainty was granite, his faith unyielding. She chose instead to keep her silence a fortress of words unspoken. Days passed, measured by the chopping of wood, the mending of fences, the feeding of cattle in bitter cold. Josiah worked from dawn until dark, his shoulders bent against the endless winter. Agnes, unwilling to be idle, tended the hearth-mended clothes and cooked what little provisions he allowed her to handle. She was no wife, yet she moved within the house as though she belonged. The routine steadied her, even as it unsettled her vows. One afternoon, as the storm relented, a visitor arrived. Sarah Whitcomb, wife to a neighboring rancher, brought bread wrapped in cloth and news from beyond the hills. A sturdy woman with gray at her temples and strength in her voice, Sarah looked Agnes over with curious eyes but without scorn. "So you're the sister," Sarah said, setting her bundle on the table. "We've heard Josiah took in a woman from the storm. Folks will talk, but don't mind them. They always do." Agnes tried to explain her mission, her vows, her intent to leave when spring opened the roads. Sarah listened, her mouth curved in something between pity and amusement. "Child," Sarah said at last, "out here vows are tested by more than temptation. Hunger wolves men like Silas Cain, that's what tests you. Out here a woman without a man is prey. Remember that." Her words sank deep, heavy with the truth of a life Agnes had never known. The cloister had sheltered her, but these mountains were merciless. Josiah's certainty, so maddening before, now stood against a backdrop of peril she could not deny. That night, lying awake beneath quilts, heavy with the scent of smoke and pine, Agnes stared at the rafters. She wondered if God's plan for her life had shifted like the snowdrifts, reshaping the path beneath her feet. Outside, Josiah's axe struck wood in steady rhythm, each blow like a heartbeat. Inside, Agnes whispered another prayer, but this time her words trembled not from cold, but from doubt. Danger has a way of circling like wolves on the edge of firelight, unseen at first, then suddenly far too close. The words of Sarah Whitcomb echoed in Sister Agnes's mind long after the woman's departure. Out here, a woman without a man is prey. Agnes had prayed against such fear, but the truth of it clung to her like the smoke of the hearth. She saw it in Josiah's wary eyes. When he scanned the tree line, in the way his hand rested on the rifle even as he split wood, in the silence that seemed to thicken whenever night fell. It was during one such evening that the first sign came. Josiah returned from checking the western pasture, his coat ripped across the sleeve, his face set in stone. "Fence is cut," he said. His voice was calm, but beneath the calm ran a current of anger. Tracks leading off toward Cain's land. Agnes set aside the mending in her lap. "Cain, Silas Cain," Josiah said, lowering himself into the chair across from her. "Owns near every acre between here and the valley. What he doesn't own, he wants. He's had his eye on this place for years. Thinks because I live alone I can't hold it." Agnes felt a chill deeper than the winter wind. "Will he harm you?" Josiah's gaze met hers. "He'll try to take what's mine. And he'll see you as weakness. Men like him always do." The days that followed brought more signs. A water trough fouled with ash. A calf driven off its tracks, ending in blood. Each act was small, but together they spelled a message clear as scripture. Silas Cain meant to break Josiah Cutter. One afternoon, as Agnes hung laundry stiff with frost, she felt eyes on her. She turned. And there he was, a tall man on horseback at the edge of the yard, hat low coat, dark against the snow. Silas Cain did not dismount. He only tipped his hat with a grin that never reached his eyes. "Didn't know Josiah kept company," he called. His voice carried easy practice, like a man used to being obeyed. "A sister, no less. Folks'll find that mighty curious." Agnes drew her shawl tighter, fighting the urge to step back. "I am under this roof as a guest, sir, nothing more." Cain laughed low and mocking. "Guest is it? Well, guests don't last long out here, not unless they've got a strong man to keep them safe. You think about that sister." Josiah came striding from the barn, then axe in hand, his shoulders filling the yard. His voice was steel. "You've had your look, Cain. Now ride on." For a long moment the two men held each other's eyes, silence heavy as storm clouds. Then Cain tugged the reins, turned his horse, and rode off slow, deliberate, like a man making a promise. "It's getting dangerous. Subscribe so you don't miss what comes next." That night, Agnes's prayers were restless. She prayed for peace, for deliverance from violence, but each creak of the cabin timbers sounded like footsteps, each howl of the wind like Cain's laugh. The wilderness no longer felt vast and holy. It felt hunted. Josiah sat by the fire, sharpening his knife, the scrape steady and sure. "He'll come again," he said simply. "This land's worth more than gold to a man like Cain. But he won't have it. Not while I breathe." Agnes wanted to remind him that vengeance belonged to the Lord, that violence begat only sorrow, but the words faltered on her tongue. For the first time she understood how fragile her safety was, how much of it rested on the shoulders of the man before her. She folded her hands, not in protest this time, but in trembling acknowledgement. If Cain came again, Josiah would be her wall against the darkness, and perhaps God forgive her. She was grateful for it. When men like Silas Cain made a threat, it was never just words. Words were only the first shot across the bow. The weeks that followed his visit bore out Josiah's grim prediction. Tracks circled the barn at night. A window was shattered by a thrown stone. One morning Agnes found the carcass of a lamb hanging from the fence, a cruel warning left to rot in the cold air. She felt her stomach twist, but Josiah only gathered the lamb in silence, burying it in the frozen earth. "He wants fear to do his work," Josiah said, his tone as steady as the spade in his hand. "But fear won't break me. And it won't break you, sister." Agnes tried to believe him. She prayed harder, longer, yet her faith trembled under the weight of dread. The mountains no longer seemed like God's sanctuary. They seemed like walls closing in, keeping the wolf at their door. The wolf came one night with fire. Agnes woke to the smell of smoke. She rushed to the window and saw the barn ablaze, flames clawing skyward, sparks scattering into the dark like fiery arrows. Josiah was already at the door, rifle in hand, his massive frame backlit by the orange glow. "Stay inside," he commanded. But Agnes could not stay. She followed him into the bitter night skirts, whipping around her legs, the heat of the fire pressing against the cold. Shadows moved in the dark beyond the barn. 3 men, maybe 4, their faces half hidden, their laughter carrying on the wind. Cain's men. Josiah raised the rifle and fired. One shadow fell, the others scattered behind cover, returning fire with shouts and curses. The night exploded with gunpowder, the firelight dancing on rifles and steel. Agnes's heart pounded. She could have fled, could have hidden, but instead she darted back inside the cabin. Her hands trembling, yet sure found Josiah's spare ammunition. She returned, crouched low behind the woodpile, and pressed the cartridges into his hand. "Good," he muttered, never taking his eyes from the dark. "Keep them coming." For the next endless hour, the two fought as one, Josiah's steady aim holding the attackers at bay. Agnes fetching and loading, whispering prayers even as she felt the recoil shake through her arms. When Josiah took a grazing shot across the shoulder, it was Agnes who dragged him inside, who tore strips from her habit to bind the wound, who whispered firm words that steadied his breathing. "You will not fall," she told him, voice fierce. "Not while I have breath in me." By dawn, the fire had gutted the barn, but the house still stood, and Cain's men had fled into the hills. Smoke curled above the homestead, black against the pale morning sky. Agnes leaned against the doorway, her body aching with exhaustion, her soul trembling with something she could not name. Josiah, blood on his sleeve and soot on his face, looked at her not with triumph, but with quiet gravity. "You see now," he said softly. "Out here, life is not a vow on paper. It's a fight, and we fight together or we don't live at all." Agnes met his gaze and felt her chest tighten. She wanted to deny him, to cling to the sanctity of her vows, but her heart betrayed her. In the fire and blood of the night, she had not been Sister Agnes the nun, but Agnes the woman, shoulder to shoulder with the man who had shielded her from death. That night she prayed again, but her words were different. They were no longer pleas for deliverance. They were questions whispered into the silence, "Lord, if this man is not madness, if he is the path you have laid before me, then grant me eyes to see it. Do you think fire and blood could change a nun's heart? Leave a heart if you agree." When the smoke cleared, silence returned, but silence after battle is never the same as before. It is heavier, haunted, and full of choices waiting to be made. The barn was gone, reduced to blackened beams and ash. The cattle had scattered into the timber, and Josiah bore a scar across his shoulder that would mark him for life. Yet they had endured. They had stood together, and Agnes knew deep in her marrow she would never forget the sight of Josiah Cutter in the firelight, unyielding, unbroken, her shield against the night. Winter loosened its grip at last. Snow melted into rivulets that carved through the fields, the passes began to open, and the roads that had once been walls now stretched like pathways of escape. With spring came the possibility of departure. Josiah knew it. One evening, as the sky blushed with sunset, he stood with her on the porch, his hat in his hands, his voice softer than she had ever heard it. "I promised you, sister. When the thaw came, I'd see you to town. I'll keep that promise. But before you choose, know this. I don't ask because of some sign or prophecy. I ask because I love you. Stay not for duty, but for me." The words struck her not as a command, but as a gift. He was giving her freedom. She saw it in his eyes. If she left, he would let her go, though it might break him in two. And if she stayed, it would be by her own will, not by his faith alone. That night, Agnes did not sleep. She knelt by the small wooden cross she had fashioned on the mantel and poured out her heart in prayer. She confessed her confusion, her longing, her fear. Had she failed her vows? Or was this the true calling hidden within them? Could building a family, raising children in love and faith be as holy as teaching scripture in a distant school? The answer did not come in thunder or vision. It came in stillness, in the warmth of the fire, in the memory of Josiah's hand, steadying hers as bullets split the night. It came in the certainty that love, too, was divine. At dawn, she rose, her decision clear. She found Josiah in the yard mending a fence. The great man straightened, his eyes shadowed with the weight of unspoken hope. Agnes lifted her hands to her veil, removed it slowly, and let the wind carry it away. If this story moved you, subscribe and share it with a friend. My vow was to serve the Lord, she said, her voice steady. And now I see he asks me to serve through you, through this land, through the children we might raise. I choose to stay, not by command, but by love. For the first time, Josiah Cutter's stern face broke into something tender, a smile as wide as the Montana sky. A year later, the ranch bore the marks of struggle but also of triumph. The barn stood rebuilt, stronger than before. Silas Kane had tried once more to press his claim, but Josiah and his neighbors united at last drove him from the valley for good. Inside the cabin, Agnes cradled a newborn son, his tiny fingers grasping at the air, his cry filling the room with new life. Josiah stood over them, his rough hand resting gently on her shoulder, his eyes soft as he gazed at the child. Agnes looked at her husband, at the man who had once declared she would give him sons. The words that had terrified her now felt transformed, no longer prophecy, no longer burden, but promise fulfilled. The ranch was no longer a place of silence. It rang with laughter, with the lowing of cattle, with the sound of a hammer shaping timber for the future. And Agnes, once a sister bound by vows of separation, now understood her covenant had never been broken. It had only been rewritten by love, by survival, by God's mysterious hand.